When you tune your antenna, are you only looking at the SWR? Stick around and I'll show you what else you should be looking at. Welcome to the House of Ham. I'm Bob, WV7W, and today we're going to look at what I call the triad of factors that weigh into the effectiveness of an antenna system. You heard that right, antenna system. Too often we think of the antenna as a singular thing, but it is a system that includes the radiating element or elements, which is what we normally refer to as the antenna. But we also have the feed line and the ground system, whether that's radials or the ground itself. And it's all three of these things that impact how efficiently the antenna will radiate, as well as how the radio will be impacted. Too often, we focused on the standing wave ratio, or SWR. This is in large part as it is what we can see on the radio. But SWR is only a measure of how well is the antenna and feed line matched to the radio. The radio is expecting a 50 ohm impedance. Impedance is the second measure we need to concern ourselves with. And according to Wikipedia, impedance is the opposition to alternating current presented by combined effect of resistance and reactance in a circuit. And basically, it is the resistance or load presented to the transmitter at a particular frequency. And that leads us to the third measure we're going to look at, and that is reactance, which is often overlooked. And Wikipedia states that reactance is the opposition presented to alternating current by inductance or capacitance. It is this last one I'm going to focus mostly on. Why? Because we often mistakenly refer to an antenna being resonant at the minimum SWR. Sometimes this is true, but more often it isn't. The true definition of resonance is when there is zero inductive or capacitive reactance. Resonance is also where the antenna is most efficient and transfers the most signal from the feed line to the air. Okay, enough theory. Let's look at some practical examples. And I will be using my trusty Rig Expert AA55 Zoom antenna analyzer. You can do the same thing with a Nano VNA, but I like how easily I can jump around with this one. Now I'm going to start with 20 meters. Let's take a look at the SWR plot. As you can see, we have a 1.1 to 1 SWR at 14.180 megahertz. Not too bad of an SWR that is fairly centered in the band. Some might think that since we don't have a 1-to-1 SWR, we are not resonant. But when we look at the RX plot, we see that we are actually pretty close to resonance, with about 0.26 ohms of inductive reactance. Remember I said that resonance is when we have zero reactance. So why isn't our SWR also perfect? Because the one thing that directly correlates to SWR is the impedance, not the reactance. You can see the impedance denoted as R is 55 ohms. Check this out. 55 divided by 50 is, drum roll please. Yep, you got it, 1.1. You see, a mismatched impedance is what causes our SWR to be off. That is what antenna tuners are all about. They change the impedance to match the antenna system to the 50 ohm load the transmitter expects. Let's look at the Smith chart real quick, and you can see the blue and yellow arc. That is the same frequency plot as on our SWR chart. You see that red circle? It is just above the center line, which means it is slightly inductive reactance. Above the line is inductive, and below is capacitive. You see the circle labeled here with a 1? That is the 50 ohm resistance circle. The 2 would be 100 ohms, the 0.5 would be 25 ohms, and so on. Our little red circle is just off to the right of it, denoting our 55 ohm impedance. I know the Smith chart can look intimidating, but it is really just another way to look at the numbers plotted over a range of frequencies. And I use it a lot less than the RX plot. Finally, on the all parameters view, you can see all of the numbers I've talked about, plus a few others, such as return loss, which is just another way of looking at SWR. But instead of a measure in a ratio, it is measured in dB, and higher is better, vice SWR, which is lower is better. Return loss is primarily used by RF engineers. And there is also the inductance and capacitance figures. But to be honest, I don't know how you can really use those. If you know, leave a comment below. Now, let's go over to the 30 meter band. I specifically chose this one to demonstrate a point. Notice that the minimum SWR is actually below the band at 10.080 megahertz. So you might be inclined to shorten your antenna a bit to get that best SWR. But hold your horses a minute. Let's take a look at the RX plot first. So this shows us that we have near perfect resonance at 10.124 megahertz, right in the middle of the band. This is actually where the antenna is most efficient. And I can take the 1.17 to 1 SWR. In fact, even at the top of the band, it's just over 1.2 to 1, which is perfectly usable SWR. Now, practically speaking, the difference between the SWR and resonance at these minute differences probably isn't going to amount to hill beans on how well you communicate. So don't get wrapped around the axle on any of this. Now finally, let's take a quick look at the 40 meter band. Now the minimum SWR is 7.130 and 1.13 to 1 SWR. A look at the RX plot shows that we are at negative 0.65 ohms of reactance, which is capacitive since it is a negative number. Although you can't really see it, but in the Smith's chart, it is just below the line. Now if we go back to the RX plot, we see that our impedance is 56.44, or 1.13 times more than 50. I hope this gives you a little better understanding of impedance and reactance and how they relate to SWR and the overall effectiveness of your antenna system. If you have any areas of this subject you would like me to dive deeper into, or if I missed or messed something up, leave a comment below. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you found this helpful. If you did, give that thumbs up a tap. And if you want to know when my next video comes out, hit that subscribe button. Until next time, 73s.